Corey, happy Wednesday. We are so excited to chat with you today about Superfest and all things Web3. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here. I think this is like one of the first pro podcasts we've done since we started. A lot of things are Twitter Spaces, so I feel honored. I feel elevated, ready to
Hell
rip
yeah.
it.
Nice.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I've been, I think two people now have introduced me to Superfest, so I'm excited to get into it. But before we
nice.
go down that rabbit hole here, give us some background on yourself. What were you up to pre-Web3?
Um, wow. So that's actually really interesting to talk about that whole story. So, in 20, really it's 2019, but it was like December of 2018. I had just started my creative agency called 11 Ounces, which stands for the average weight of a human heart. We had this, desire to do something that was more soulful in the way that we connected brands to consumers. We thought what was happening already at that point in time with, the mass abundance of influencers and social media. Like one of the things that we were inspired by is the fact that like all these brands were like really hell bent on building social communities, but didn't really want to engage with them. Like there was no dialogue, right? It was just like one way communication of like, please listen to me. So like our whole philosophy was like, well, if we start to listen to the people and rally communities around these brands, we'll develop creative with your core consumer that'll ultimately be better than what anybody could ever create because these people love your product and your brand anyway, right? So like that was like our whole like positioning. Um, and we did, I think it was like a year of work, and then the pandemic hit.
Mm.
And the hardest part about that is like you're looking at all this stuff that like, you build your career for the opportunity, many people to become an entrepreneur. Like I came from a, background being born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, where like, I didn't have disposable income that was there for me to go and just get seed money. Right. And I wanted to bootstrap it, and I didn't really want to have investors. I wanted to like, go like the more like path less traveled, which you'll come to find out I'm a glutton for pain. Um, and you look at these world circumstances and you're like, holy shit, like I'm working so hard, but it doesn't really matter right now, does it? Because whatever you think matters has to be put on hold because there's all these other circumstances. So long story short, we fought through that and actually became a way better business throughout it all. And the two best parts about it were, and I only tell this story to some people in terms of how I became affiliated with Superfly. um, but I learned really how to operate a business the right way through this because you had to think differently, and also how to like survive. And
Hmm.
so we started doing, like I was telling you before the show, a lot of live streaming production, working in gaming tournaments. We were managing SoundCloud's whole Twitch channel at the time, which they were very invested in, doing a bunch of weekly shows. Um, and the funny thing is, and for better or worse, I was like, like by any means necessary, I learned how to do video production because I had no other choice to like save the business. Um, so in that time, right before the pandemic hit, 2 weeks, I have my first conversation with Rick Farman, the CEO of Superfly. We get introduced to him because they're working on a new exploratory project for Superfly. Someone who I used to work with when I was head of brand for basketball at Under Armour was like,
Mm.
"Oh, you got to talk to Corey. Him and his partners are really good in this field." Blah blah blah. We have one conversation where like we're literally just riffing on like a WebEx or like even not, we weren't even using live video at that point, right? Because it wasn't the pandemic. Um, and I was like, okay, cool, great. Like, I've been to Bonner, love Superfly, went to school in Tennessee, so I'm familiar with you guys. End the call, pandemic hits. I'm like, oh, the thing we were talking about, because it was experiential based, like, not going to happen now. So, like, we'll just go on our merry way. 9 months later, Caroline, who's my partner in crime on Superfest, hits my email and she's like, hey, I was given this project that I think you were a part of. The person who was running it's no longer here, but on a piece of paper it said, Corey 11 ounces are really dope. Talk to them. She's like, let's talk. And then,
I
long
love
story
that.
short, now like I'm an official employee of Superfly. I'm a co-founder of Superfest. I'm working with Rick and Caroline on a daily basis. I consider them family now, and it's like that chance occurrence is how we got here. And the last piece that I would say that happened, like in this whole run up, is I just became obsessed with Web3 because the whole
Mm.
community nature that we were building in our business and creative is like my struggle was how do we make this make sense from an infrastructure perspective, right? Like it's nice to say conceptually we're going to do creative differently, but like when it all hits the fan, what's your infrastructure? And I just wasn't tapped in, in 2018 really to be like, oh yeah, it's the blockchain. you know? And so through Web3, I was like, yeah, like all this other stuff that's cool and speculative assets and making money, like that's fun, whatever. But I was like, this is the future of like how shit starts to change and the paradigm for how we communicate as communities and brands and people starts to become more consequential in my point
Hmm.
of view. So that's a way
What?
longer introduction than you asked for, but I feel like maybe there's some good nuggets there.
Yeah, yeah, all good. So what was it about? So it seems like with your creative agency, you're dealing with a lot of community building and
Mhm.
community engagement. What
Yeah.
what piece of Web3 was it that really clicked in your brain where you're like, oh, this is the new thing that I need to be a part of?
Well, it's an interesting question. I don't know if it was like one thing. What I was in the spirit of at this point in time, and I'll be the first. I'll directly say that I was part of this transition. Was I got into Web3 because of GameStop? Fact, and I think a lot of people did.
Yep.
And my whole thing with GameStop was like I wasn't someone that was super early. I was there right before it like exploded. And my whole thing has always been like if you talk to people that know me, the one thing that they would say is like he has a natural superpower for is like I can see when a cultural trend is like is like bubbling to a point of like if you don't get on this train now you're gonna miss it because it's like it's out the door. And so um I did that successfully with GameStop, and I got like all my friends who were already hanging out in Discord, and like in the pandemic, I was playing video games for the first time in like fucking 8 years and stuff like that, having a blast hanging out with college friends. We're like 32 people on a server streaming everything from like Twitch shows to like League of Legends, whatever. And funny enough, there was this like we have like all different age ranges, right? So like our buddy's brother was like 21, and he's like, "Have you heard of this Wall Street Bets thing?" I was like, "So I of course I'm the first one to check it out," and I'm like, oh my God, this is crazy. But I was like, there's something here. And so I just start watching it and I just start seeing the momentum. And I'm watching like the user count go up on the daily. And I'm like, okay, yeah, we need to all tap in on this. And everybody's like, fuck you, like, no way, blah, blah, blah. I was like, okay, cool. I'm going to do it myself. And then, of course, everybody comes in. We ride that whole, week. We have like literally songs to this day. If I play this song, like everyone's like, oh my God, are we making money? Like, that's like what we played, like, as it was all going off. And I was like, and I told everybody, I was like, I'm not here to make money. I'm here for the cultural phenomenon. I'm here for the story because there's something in this internet culture that's brewing that is being forced through the pandemic, but like it's already here. So it's happening now at a hyperbolic scale. And I want to get on the inside of this and start to dissect it because I think there's some real creative ideas and kind of like human ideas and concepts that can be birthed out of this. And so that happened and, got off the train, dissected it. Like I thought it was really interesting. And then like the conversation for Web3 was happening where like I had a chance to mint a Bored Ape and was just like, I've never forget looking at this because I was where was I? I think I went into the office during the pandemic or something at one point, like as we were cleaning it out to get rid of the office because we work remote now. And I remember like going to my computer and looking at it and being like, no fucking way. Like, no way. No way. There's no way. I was like, a YouTube channel? Like, no way. And I just like remembered like texting some people. I was like, what do you think about this? They're like, you're high. Like if you think, and I was like, okay, fine, cool. I'm not crazy. Uh, and then like I walked away. And funny enough, the end of that week, I start looking in like this business is starting to come in for us, and like we're figuring this shit out, right? And the funny thing is, like you start figuring it out, and you're like, wait a minute, like I've reduced headcount and operations, so actually my business is like healthier than it's ever been because I'm like doing it in a different way because I'm forced to think about this puzzle piece differently. And I look at CryptoPunks because I'm like, this something keeps bringing me back to this. And it wasn't like Gary Vee was a little bit like I know Gary and like I have like my mentor I was telling you about earlier is very close with him, so we have
Hmm.
connective tissue there. But I was just like until it makes sense for me, whatever. And I started getting some money in my like bank account, like like kind of flexible money. And I'm like, I think I'm gonna buy a CryptoPunk. And I'm like, I'm sitting there like about to put bids, and I'm like, no way. Like, what the fuck are you like if you told your wife, like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, you got
How
a
much was it
kid,
at that time?
18,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So
That's a
no
lot.
doubt. And so it was one of those things. And like I'm happy to be the person that's like the naysayer, whatever. And then I just started seeing conversations on social and interest from interesting people and doing my own research to the point where I was like, next thing that I see, like I'm just gonna ape in and I'm just gonna like ride the train and I'm gonna go from the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, and just try to consume as much knowledge as I can. That's just what I did. And um, the coolest part is like I've built so many dope relationships with people that I otherwise would not have met. Like I see this more as like a bigger way to have consequence through digital connectivity than ever before, and to rally people with common interests to create really cool things that didn't exist. And so what's fascinated me, but I didn't engage with it to a deep degree, was like the concept of DAOs was like where I was like, wow, like that's really interesting. Like this, like, oh, you're going to invent the next Disney. It's like, I'll believe that shit when I see it. You know what I mean? If anybody has a chance to do it, I think it's Yuga, and for many different reasons. And I think actually the other side's going to be Fire. There's a long way to go. Let me be clear. Like I'm a supporter of that, especially that ecosystem for what they've achieved. But the DAO concept to me felt like, in a way, what culture has been missing and needing for a long, long time. And I didn't know how to engage with it, but I knew that like that's where my research was really going to focus around.
Mm-hmm.
So
For listeners that don't know what DAOs are, how do you explain a DAO to somebody that's new to this space?
that's funny. To me, a DAO done really well is a venture capital group of commoners that are trying to create something fresh from a common interest. So like the way that I explain Superfest to people when I'm like, okay, like if I take like everything away and try to simplify it as much as I can, it's like it's a venture capital for creative and arts with a really dope party at the end of the year. You know what I mean? Like we're trying to fund things that are artful, creative, expressive, that empower our community. And then at the end of the year, we have a music and arts festival that celebrates all the dope shit we've done for the year. And our hope is to create a music and arts festival that not only in the way that we get there is very different than what you typically see, because like one of the big things that's different about how we're approaching this is Coachella, Bonnaroo, Big Ears, you know, whatever, whatever it is. Most of these festivals exist for like 8-week time horizons, right? Where it's like lineup, excitement. Are you going? Are you not? Cool, we're there. Bye. And our thing is like we're always on tour. We're 24/7, 365. And so, you know, in the interest of that, it's like we're co-creating with a group of people on a consistent basis to realize this future that we want. Like I tell people from like a DAO perspective, what I think is really interesting is like, if I have $1,000, I can't do a lot with that. If I can find 1,000 other people with $1,000, we can put some cracks in the pavement. You know what I mean? And I think with the way that like, particularly what I believe the core consuming generation of Web3 today is, which is millennials, because it's like, we're just old enough to have a pulse on culture and not be irrelevant and have flexible spending cash to be able to say like, I can put up the extra 1,000, but maybe not 10, 50, because we've gone through 2 recessions now. I think it's a really big opportunity. And I think that millennials have a lot to say and are really misunderstood by like a lot of modern media in terms of what they want to see in the world. But I think the reason that a lot of us are misunderstood is because we've gone through a lot of shit. You know what I mean? When you just think about it. And so I think that the DAO, and I don't think this is just for millennials, but I just think that like we're the ones that are going to pioneer what this is, because we are exposed, we have the exposure to get it, and we have the ability to invest in it, and we have the passion because we want to see something different in the world, to come together and do something in that capacity. So yeah, I think it's a venture capital with a common interest, a venture capital fund with a common interest run by commoners, you know, that have a little bit of a propensity for technology and innovation.
I love if millennials would be known for something good. Hopefully
I
DAOs would
didn't,
be
you
it.
know what
Yeah.
though, like hot take, like I don't think the media has any interest in representing anything that's positive anymore. You know what I mean? It's like
No,
I
no,
think he's like the biggest piece of
100%.
shit in the humankind in Roger Stone, but like at the same time, he says something I think is really impactful in what he said in his Netflix special, which is like anger and hate is a more powerful emotion than love. And it's like, you know, if you tell that to my dad who grew up in the '60s and was a musician, he'd be like, you know, that's disgusting. And I'm like, yeah, but like we're here now, right? But there's, you know,
Yep.
there's a lot of positivity from every single generation, and I think the biggest piece is like my belief with Web3. What I'm very excited about, because I've never felt at home with popular social media, because I've always looked at it as like this is shit. Like personally, like here we go into the hot take shit. But like my thing, and I tweeted about this today. It's like we have to stop celebrating people who own things and start like to connect deeper and have meaningful conversations and substance around people who like have ideas and substance and motivation to be things versus ownership. Like materialism is like a real bad part of society right now. And it's like, yo, we all have credit cards. Like I could go and buy Balenciaga XYZ if I wanted to. That doesn't mean shit for who I am. You know what I mean? But we've gotten away from that. So I think that's kind of like, you know, what for me, what's resonated with Web3 is tribes versus mass, you know?
You said You said something really interesting, how ownership in Web3 and kind of like that fame and kind of saying like I have this or that. Oftentimes Web 1 is described as read, Web 2 as read and write, Web 3 as read, write, and own. How does that conflict with that kind of notion that you can have these NFTs, you can have this kind of status because you
Well,
own certain
that's a
things?
really, really good question, because I think that the bad part of where we are is that we have a Web 2 mindset with Web 3 opportunity. So it's like in Web 2, it's read and write, but it's read and write about majority of it is like either, well, a lot of it is really like read and write about reality TV, right? Like people don't do things, they do things through other people. They live vicariously, right? So part of the culture that's emerged with that is the flex. Is I live vicariously through people who are more than I am and are aspirational to what I hope to be, which, like it or not, a lot of time is based on material interest, right? They own this. Their mate looks like this, like they do these extravagant things. And so, like in Web 3, when you bring it into it, is like, yo, Web 3 happens so fucking fast and so toxically fast, like it or not, like I'll say it, like culture should not happen that fast. And that's why we have a struggle with like what is the culture of Web 3? Because if you were not part of that 20 like initial CryptoPunk minting Bored Ape, got a bag early, no one looks on this shit favorably. Let's be clear. Like no one's sitting there being like, oh man, like this is so cool. Like let me go and buy a $200,000 ape. Like no one's like, oh yeah, I get it. I want to be part of it. People are like, fuck those guys. Fuck those white middle-aged dudes with money. Let's be clear. You know
Yep.
what I'm saying? And so what I think the problem is that this whole community of what we express it as is look at how much more I have than you. Like look at the alpha group. It's a bunch of people that are basically in a boiler room being like, what's the latest tip so we can all be exit liquidity for each other? You know what I mean? Like it's bad practice. And we really let it all live and not really call bullshit on it, because the other thing is that like NFT Twitter is an echo chamber. You know what I mean? And so it's like, I think that where we hope to go, because I've talked to a lot of people behind the scenes who like have the same feelings as I would, like, they're like, I don't know if I want to be part of this if it's going to be this way anymore, or only this way, right? Like where we have to go is start to embrace things like music NFTs, where people are trying to tell broader stories and like differentiate between streaming, which like again, hot take, terrible for the artist. Not really hot take, it's obvious. Versus like the fan club and the inner circle, which is where the NFT is going to come in, right? So like these are more interesting concepts to me. Like Nouns DAO, in my opinion, dopest project that exists in the space, because they seek to do something very different and pave a way for people to do stuff together with consequence. You know what I mean? And I think that's where we'll start to have some of the convergence of like the best of Web 2 melding with Web 3. But right now, a lot of Web 3 is like bag talk, flex, clout chasing from the Web 2 era, but just with
Mhm.
digital assets. And like, I think personally, that shit's corny.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I hear what you're saying. How do you reconcile? Because you're a Bored Ape owner, right? You're part of
Yeah,
this very exclusive ownership club. How do you?
it's very true. It's
I mean,
very true. I
you can
literally
see
have a
it right
piece of
behind you
fucking
there.
other side land on my wall. Yeah, I
Yeah,
know.
other side.
I
Yeah.
know.
So how do you reconcile with that? Because I agree. Like, it is that sort of like, here's my bag, here's my bag, here's what I own. It gives me theoretically you have access to things that we don't. Where does it go next? How do we get out of that?
Well,
Or do we get out
so
of that?
I guess I would clear this up. So I was on the outside looking in because I was like burnt by the fact that I didn't mint and I had the opportunity. So of course, like you feel that. And I never understood like people giving credence to like people who had this digital asset in front of their name. It's like, oh, you're an authority now. It's like, this doesn't even sound halfway intelligent. Um, But like many people who have ended up buying an ape did, I spent some time looking at all the different trades. I had made some money flipping, so I was fortunate in that regard because I got in early enough to like catch the what I call like the Instagram rug wave, which is like things were being shilled on Instagram. There's way too many people with too much time and money on their hands jumping at things they had no idea about. And I'll admit that like I knew what I was doing and like learned and took enough lumps to be able to profit during that time. I was like, okay, cool. I'm gonna get a piece that like I really am proud of, that I like, and I just fell in love with the rainbow grill, which is like kind of like if you look at like my Clonex, like Clonex has a rainbow grill too. So like that's my like trait, I would say. And then the other side, crystal thing, like mixes in with that whole brand DNA of like the crystals and the jewels and the gem tones or whatever, which is kind of like, core to who I am. I have like 40 different crystals in my office or whatever, for whatever reason. And the other piece that I make clear is I honestly have received zero benefit from being a Bored Ape holder. Like, I think that the original community that founded it and stays close was before my time. I went to Ape Fest and had fine time. I've been to a lot of live shows and festivals where I was just like, it's cool. It's cool. Like, too many people in the crowd that don't know who LCD Sound System is. Kind of weird, but it's cool. Not a lot of people dancing, but it's cool. Not a lot of weed smoke.
It's exclusive.
It's all right. 30-minute drink times. It's cool. Way too many people in line for merch. Interesting. But I met a couple people that are, ape holders, and generally I think that like a lot of people have not done the membership piece to it right. Like, if you got a lot of value out of the Bored Ape ecosystem, it's because you got in early and you held, and you got the airdrops, and but it's all monetarily beneficial. And I just don't believe that that's the only way to create value. I actually, in fact, believe that culture based on financial gain is not a culture at all. There's like one culture that's been built that way, and it's called Wall Street. And you tell me how cool that is. You know what I mean? So it's like, I don't have an interest in being built out. Like, I was part of sneaker culture in 2004 when like Supreme was just becoming a thing in New York. Like, I remember going to the Supreme store for the first time, like looking at like box logo tees and being like, I guess I'll spend, $30 on this, whatever. Like, I like the name. It's cool. I had a bunch of friends who skated or whatever. I went down to college in the South wearing like Bape and Billionaire Boys Club and Supreme and all this shit like in 2005. People looked at me like I was an alien that got dropped in the middle of Knoxville, Tennessee. And when things get overly commoditized and commercialized and money becomes part of the whole thing and the StockX flip, it's like it completely washes out the soul of this whole thing, which is why sneaker culture is dead now. Like, everybody that's part of sneaker culture knows that the shit is washed. You know what I mean? And so for me, I'm like, it's interesting. Like, I have to fight instincts because we're in a time with social media where everybody's like, dashboard, numbers, scoreboard, go, time horizon, how long, you don't have enough time, what's your viral moment, PR. And I'm like, but all those things can be manufactured. Like, to me, it's easier to create hype than it is to create something of substance that matters to people enough where they want to create it gradually together. I find that to be the art form. Because it's like, if you can actually say no to hype and you can go into the bunker with like 100, 200, 500 other people and start to create dope shit, not a lot of people do that anymore. And like, that's how hip hop was born. You know what I mean? Like, there was a time in fucking New York where people listened to hip hop. Like, that's not music. Where are we now? But like, anything worthwhile has got to burn slow. It's got to. And that's why, like, honestly, the bear market is the best thing that happened to Web3. Best thing. Go ahead. I can go long. I'm sorry.
I want to tie something. So you just started talking about creative again. And at the very beginning, you said you wanted to do creative differently, but you also run an agency. And I imagine that means that you want to run an agency differently. And then you also said that you were really into DAOs. How do DAOs change your agency so that you can do creative differently?
That's, it's an interesting question for a lot of different reasons. It's interesting because it's like, transparently, I'm so focused on Superfest. Like, it's really the majority of all of my life right now. Because for a lot of reasons, I have really incredible partners in the team that help me run 11 ounces. And we have a very unique business model with how we operate lean and have a lot of really good partners and things of that nature. I don't know that the DAO's ready to impact my core business yet because the learning curve is still high, right? But I think the way that we were using a similar concept prior to even knowing about what a DAO was basically like finding the most talented creatives that loved a brand, bringing them into the creative process and being like, rather than paying this photographer that I would pay to shoot a campaign, I'm going to go find everyday people that love this brand that also are photographers to be the ones that we pay and shoot, and almost use it as like a point, like a platform for them to get to the next level, point of exposure, an opportunity for them to be mentored and learn. Like we actually ran a bunch of these kinds of things. Like we did this really cool campaign where we did a whole photo shoot out in LA for Paper Planes, which is like Jay-Z's brand under Rock Nation. Um, and one of the kids that was a photographer had never had like a professional opportunity and got hired by the Yankees following the campaign that we did. Right. So like, to me, like that's the case of like what the fuck I've ever been trying to do. Right. Because my whole thing, and why I'm honestly not great at running a business and advertising, and I'll be the first one to say it, is I just will not take every money. Like every dollar that like every like if I can't like it's the same thing as like I can't sell a product I don't truly believe in. I just am not that kind of person. I can't sell products on behalf of a brand if I don't believe in what they're doing. Like you'll never see me work for craft food. Like you just won't. And it's like no disrespect. Like I used to love, Velveeta a lot. I tried it recently. Not as good as when I was a kid. But like I just don't believe in that. You know what I mean? Like I work with SoundCloud because I believe in up and coming artists getting a platform to break into the game and change it in the way that Uzi and Cardi did back when they were coming up. You know what I mean? But like I'm ethically very conscious about who I work with in advertising. I think that's how I probably stomach the reality of what I'm doing is morally always at conflict a little bit with like, how you might hear me come off with having a very, specific point of view in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we haven't dove into Superfest yet or really explained what it is. Can you kind of give us the rundown of what Superfest is? And it sounds like you're spending all day, every day focused on Superfest.
That's all I think about, honestly. And it's actually at this like really, really fucking cool point right now that like I never thought I would enjoy as much as I am. So Superfest is the offspring of Superfly Productions, which is, the founding fathers of Bonnaroo back at the start of the American Music Festival explosion in the early 2000s, which was then followed up by many other experiential activations, but most notably Outside Lands in Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. And the idea for Superfest, led by one of my now mentors, Rick Farman, who's the CEO of Superfly and one of the OGs that created this company in Bonnaroo, which I went to many times in college and like just had this like out of body experience with how incredible of a thing was created, because it's like the experience was as good as the music. You know what I mean? And it's hard. Like I've been to a lot of festivals. That's not the case for most of them, where it's like you go and you're like, I'm in another world now.
And they were like one of the OGs, right? Like one of the first festivals to be able to do that.
It was like Coachella, Lolla, and Bonnaroo were all happening in different pockets of the country in the first couple of years at the same time. And like, they started really like, it's funny. They started really at like, with a jam band and like rock focused lane that then evolved. And my first Bonnaroo that I ever went, or second Bonnaroo, like Jay-Z was one of the headliners, who's like my favorite artist of all time and stuff. So they evolved over time, but they carved out a niche with like a very specific type of genre and consumer, which is funny because like I don't think it'd be harder to do that today because people are so cross genre. You know what I mean? But they killed it. And, Bonnaroo's gone on to be like a staple of the circuit now in a really big way. And again, has always maintained that experiential side, camping festival in the middle of nowhere, Tennessee. I went to University of Tennessee. So like when I was there, people were like, oh yeah, we do this thing Bonnaroo every year. And I was like, it's fucking weird. The only reason I know about that is because growing up in Brooklyn, I had this one psycho friend of mine that went to Bonnaroo in 2006. And he got in a car that drove down from Brooklyn to Tennessee with nothing in his like bag, but like one change of clothes, had no tent, no nothing, and went down there, like went to Rage Against the Machine and like came back and looked like he'd been living on it like as a homeless person for the last week. But it had, it had a very near and dear place in my heart. And back to the story. So Rick is like this serial entrepreneur that like loves creativity and live music and the communal experience of that. Right. And so he wanted to do something that was very different and, had some influential people. I think I was one of them that were very connected to Web3. And so Superfest essentially is coming out of this ecosystem of like building large scale and boutique size live experiences for decades, 25 years now. And you buy an NFT called the Superpass, and it's your membership token that grants you to be a founder of a future festival that we are going to build collectively as a community with Superfly. So Superfly is going to actually do the production, but as a community member and a founder, which is different, and we treat people in our community very different than how you typically are treated in like a NFT community. you are going to basically creative direct concept influence the decision making of what this festival is. You know, is it going to be in the middle of a field? Is it going to be in the inner city? Is it going to be in one place? Is it travel? How much money are we going to spend on experience versus security? Like, well, not really security, because we got to make sure that that's like done in a certain way. But there's ways to get around that. Like, it's actually, I'll share an insight. We had our first planning meeting a week ago, and we were looking at like typical festival field settings, hybrid settings, inner city settings, and I talk about, and like one of like the new kind of like memes in the community is that fences are the enemy. Because what people don't realize, when you're actually owning the P&L of a festival, which all of our founders are, right? Like, we went and walked them through a festival P&L, which is like, you normally are not getting this exposure, right? This is like close to the vest type shit. Also with like people that like invented the game, right? You start to look at the price of fencing, and you're like, wait a minute, like, I can get another headliner for this shit. Like, fencing. And so, like, you know, it kind of like starts to make you think like, maybe we want to do something city based for the first couple of years, because why would we take that money and put it to fencing? Like, if you think about what the fencing price is, well, then what are porta potties and what are this, you know? And so it's a really interesting exercise that we're all going through with the community, where everybody's thinking very critically about how to, you know, build this festival. But what I think is more exciting is it's not just a festival. Superfest is a decentralized festival collective that consists of artists, superfans, and makers. And we come together with the shared interest to go see shows together, to throw our own shows, to celebrate art and culture, and our North Star is to build Superfest. And the engine that powers the whole thing is our Superfest treasury, which is our DAO-like component. So what we did when we went through Mint, and I'll be the first one to say, so we have 3,333 founder tokens. We minted about half of them. 80% of that revenue went into the treasury. 20% went back to the project to pay for staffing and, you know, allow me to have a family and all that kind of shit, as well as some other people that work really, really hard on this. And 325,000 went into the treasury. And so since then, we've had a group of 7 Superfest holders go to Halloween last week. We had a Fish and MSG New Year's pre-party that's going to have 50 people come into our orbit and hang out before the shows over New Year's be approved. Carnival Rio trip was approved. Art Basel we're going to, which was $70,000 was approved through the treasury. So the community now is creating experiences, small and large, using what we were giving to them. And the best part of it is it's all chapters in the book of building Superfest, right? So it's all, we're always on tour, we're always activating, we're creating new ideas, we're putting them actually in the market. We're using that to recruit more people in. And ultimately, like I said, like, we're going to end up building this festival. So again, it's a, you know, creative venture capital firm run by commoners with the power of Superfly, building a dope ass party at the end of the year, but also a lot of really cool stuff in between. So sorry that that's long winded, but I don't believe that there's really many other projects that are doing what we're doing in the space. So I like to take the time to talk about how different it is and kind of all the components.
For sure. Yeah. So like you said, you mentioned about half of them. So that's about what, 1,500 founders that own a super pass.
Yeah.
What types of people are those? Is it like, do you even know, do you have insight into who these people are? Like, are they mainly artists? Are they mainly just people who like festivals?
So
or, yeah, who are they?
So we have over 100 artists that are both visual and music artists, like everybody from Pussy Riot to Justin Barrett, the Glitch Mob, to Amber Vittoria, who's, you know, very well-known visual artist, Jen Stark, a bunch of other LPGOB, Blondish, you know, like, we have like a very robust artist roster, which Caroline has been, you know, responsible for putting together. What's also cool is we have a bunch of like Web3 endemic artists that are part of that, like Cam Murdoch, Domino, Taro. Like, we have a bunch of people that are like born out of Web3 from a, you know, musical perspective. So we want to give them a platform as well and be part of that story. We have industry founders as well. So people that are less artists, but like working in the business of music and creating really dope shit in that capacity. And then we have a lot of people that are like festival goers and super fans, right? And the cool thing about it from a community perspective is that if you're like a super fan, you get closer exposure to the creative process than ever before. And I like to tell people that like with the treasury, you actually get to be a creative in a different way, right? Because like each proposal is creatively driven, right? Like the best proposals have like a point of view and an idea, and like you have to sell people on it. Um, but on the flip side, if you're an artist, you get proximity to a group of people that like love art and culture the way that you do. So like you can test new ideas. You know, like a lot of people that we brought into our orbit have said that like one of their incentives that they want to expand their brand, and it's hard to do that sometimes under their normal moniker and their normal horizon that they work within. So in Web3, they can take risks and chances that otherwise they might not be able to. So it's really inspiring to them. But yeah, it's a very like vibrant and robust community. We have in total 656 unique holders right now. So it is a small community, but it's also like been a blessing for that, because like I've personally met with over 95 of the people that are in our community,
Oh, cool.
like on like a hour long one-on-one call. So I know I have like, and I take it upon myself to like try to do a good amount of that on a consistent basis. We've had a lot of like meetups where people have, met up and gone to shows together. And you can see the camaraderie that comes through, you know what I mean? Like I think one of these things where people are very understanding of what the opportunity is long term, and the investment of the people that are a part of it, and also the mentorship opportunity and learning opportunity that goes into a very like high barrier to entry industry. Like it's not easy to get into this field. So the fact that you have people that have been in it for decades and worked in it from various different capacities is like pretty cool, that you get that level of exposure and opportunity to collaborate, ideate, and learn from people that do things that you want to do, but otherwise might have no idea how to even break in.
Totally. Can you tell us a little bit about the treasury and how that works from a business side? So there's 80% of the revenue from the mint went into the treasury, and that can be
Yep.
used to fund proposals like
Yep.
these trips to other festivals. What happens when the money runs out? How does that get replenished?
Well, that's a really good question. So one of the things that we have done to go forward, and like a couple things. I am not, and I was, and I've changed, but I used to be like a perfectionist in a creative way, and then I got into like an iterative optimization based approach, where it's like, hey, actually it's never going to be perfect, so what you should do is start, because then you'll have benchmarks where you can start to like really see how do we advance the ball, right? So a lot of the early stuff that we've been improving is we want to get people out and experiencing, right? We want to get the insights tangibly from when you were at a festival 7 deep, branded tents and all this shit. Like, what did people say? What did they think? Because then we can start to level it up. So we've gotten out of the gates. We've now formed, it's funny, I don't even know what the official name of them is, but it's a treasury council of 8 different people that have various experiences with DAOs, to oversee the education, the KPIs, the guardrails, information that comes with leveraging our treasury in the future. And what they're doing is they're looking at what's happening as like a proof of concept, and they're basically writing up like, this was good, this was bad, this is okay, and here's why. So we can basically distill all the insights and start to have like a V2 of the treasury. Because like, I'll be honest, the full treasury hasn't even opened yet. Right now, it's just this field trip program, which is like go to an event and activate at it. The Basel one, we ran through the core treasury as like a preview, because what we're doing is very other side driven of like, let's iterate and like move step by step into like the next lanes. Because not everybody in our community is like really diehard DAO, diehard NFT Web3. Like we're teaching a lot of people at the same time, because festival culture is all over the spectrum in terms of their proximity, right? But the core thing, which we're going to drive into in Basel, is the replenishment, right? So I told you how much like we ended up approving through the treasury. Our goal is to end essentially through the efforts of our community and our inner team, is to basically reduce what we are taking out of the treasury to almost zero, if not make money on the entire thing by the way that we structure it. And so it's a learning experience in the sense that if people can start to think this way, which like shockingly, I'll tell you, they already were. Like I remember like when we first submitted the proposal to the treasury, people were coming in Discord being like, are we sure that we want to put 25% of the treasury up for this? And like, what's our target consumer? And I'm like, let's go. Like we're asking like real business owner questions now, right? Like this is awesome. And like, by the way, like I didn't tell you guys to say this shit. But yeah, so now we're going to in a replenishment exercise. The other thing that we're building out, and there's like a whole other window to this, but we're building a founder portal, because we also know that Discord is a huge barrier to entry for us. And so it's going to take all the information in for most people in this world, right? Of festivals. is to take all the information in Discord, make it more accessible through like an app-like function.
Cool.
And one of the key pieces of that is going to be recruitment, because the way that we want to leverage the rest of our tokens and bringing and growing our founder base, I don't want random people to just go ahead and mint off the contract anymore. Right? Like we had that opportunity, we had that initial wave. Everything now is hand-to-hand combat, because what matters is the intentionality of everybody coming into this community. If we're going to create something great that's going to build a legacy, and we're going to have values that we're going to adhere to, and we're going to have accountability, and we're going to like introduce new concepts that are going to allow us to work together on a day-to-day basis. We're going to do creative projects. We're going to fund them. We're going to replenish this, and we're going to get deep into the trenches of building something fucking dope. We got to know that we're bringing the right people in. So the founder portal is going to have an ability to say like, yo, like I went to a show and met this really dope person. There's 1,500 tokens in our treasury. You can mint at mint price while our floor is whatever it is by scanning this QR code and going direct to a site, and you can pay by credit card or ETH depending on what your level of familiarity with Web3 is. But it's all street team oriented for the future.
So even though mint is closed, there's still a mechanism for new people to mint.
There will only be through these, basically all the super passes went into the treasury. So these are treasury based allotments. So what we're going to be doing is saying like for Basel, for instance, and like this is, something that we're just talking about, is figuring out how many super passes from the treasury we're going to make available for recruitment at Basel.
Okay, so and this is the revenue stream for the replenishment.
It's one of them, right?
Okay.
Another revenue stream is when we sell merch at these events, right? Another revenue stream is when we sell sponsorships and partnerships at these events. Another revenue stream is going to be when people build new concepts and ideas, which I can tell you people have tons of them. They're just waiting for the treasury to open. And it's like, we fund some portion, but in them building this business or the idea, there's some replenishment mechanism that comes back to basically pay back whatever their investment was, right? So there's a lot of different ways to do it. And honestly, like, I feel like we already have like a good spectrum. Like, another thing is going to be like when the festival starts making money and things of that nature, right? Like there'll be different dynamics with that. But it's really like, focus on the ones that are ahead of you and then start to build new pathways into future revenue and opportunity as we go. And then another funny thing that I tell people is like, look, festivals are like the most expressive community, like festival people are the most expressive communities in the world. And we don't have a PFP yet. So, and that's just the start of a new conversation, right? But again, my thing is like, we are going to go at our own pace, run our own race, and we're going to stay low and keep firing, and we're going to build as our community dictates in that speed. And the beautiful thing about it is like, everybody's like, the general consensus around our current community is like, hey, like, we're good. Like, I don't want to run too much faster. Like, I love where we're at right now, and I feel very like special in that feeling. Cause like, yes, no, you've seen enough mints. Like when you don't have that, like 100% sold out, you're like, fuck man, am I good at my job? And then you just realize like, yeah, you're in a different lane. You're doing something different. It's more innovative. So it's exciting. It's fun.
How do you balance? I mean, running a business with a couple business partners is hard enough, but it sounds like you've got 656 here. And some voices are going to be way louder than others. How do you balance that? And is this kind of like a thing of like, hey, well, I've got 2 tokens, you've got 1, I've got 2 votes, you have like, how does this work? And then how do you also deal with the natural tendencies of like the floaters kind of like going with the flow, whatever, and then the ones that are actually active? Because a small echo chamber might just end up taking over the whole thing because they're just the loudest and the most interesting.
No doubt. It's a really, really fucking great question, man. I mean, I think there's a couple things. One of the things that we've done that I think has been devoid, like has not been prioritized throughout the greater space, and we were like, we're not going to make any decisions until we do this, is we codified our values up front. And I think it was that was our first vote ever. So everybody in the community voted on, are we going to adhere to this, right? And so what that does now is it creates a filter and gives air cover for everything. So like, perfect example, like we are doing as part of our Basel treasury fund, a housing stipend. Because we're like, hey, like, everyone comes from different means, and Basel's expensive. We're going to put up a certain amount of money for this one thing and make sure that like, because everyone has this passion to like stay together in houses, which is also very unique for like Web3. Like everybody, like I think we have like 30 people staying in 2 different houses where they're all like living together and like going to have their own like little activations that they're going to do and shit, right? And there was people that were like, hitting me directly being like, hey, like, I wasn't around. I didn't know this was going down. I missed the cutoff. And I'm like, hey, man, like, value number 11, answer starts with you. How do you fix this problem? That ain't mine to solve. And they're like, yeah, you're right, man. I'm sorry. Have a nice night, you know? And so, but like the
I
thing
love
is,
that.
so it's values, but then it's also like, one of the things that I've noticed is I've given so much time, and the community would test this. I've given so much time to talking to people individually, collectively. Like, there's no veil. Like, we're a different kind of project in that, right? Like, we're having a founder forum on the 17th where, like, I'm going to show people the high level of where we're going for the next like year, 18 months. Like, projects don't do that because it's all about surprise, hype, you know? And it's like, well, we know what we're building and who we're building it with and the substance that comes with it. So you should have the alpha. You're a founder. If you weren't, if we didn't do this, that you would just be a community member. And like, to me, that's even like, you're kind of a social follower in a way with a little bit more consequence. You know what I mean? And that's no disrespect to how other people do it. We're just not that model. Um, and so it really starts with like value codification and trust, right? Because I just got off a call earlier where people were like, so and so was like in their feelings or whatever. And like my response was like, let's be fucking adults. And he's like, that's what you want me to tell him? I was like, yeah, like be an adult, or like, let's like cut bait now. Like, and so it comes with like running a tone too. It's like, if the answer starts with you and there's accountability for all of us to control our own actions and intentionality with this project, I can't solve everything for you, my friend, but you got to come correct with me so I can help. And if you do, I'm super down. Right. But it's like, and that's why, honestly, like, this project's not going to be built for like the larger, like the full blown like DJing communities. But we have some of, I'm myself a self-proclaimed, like, it's just a certain mentality, and you have to filter your community that way. Otherwise, the strength for long-term building is never going to be there. And I would say that we have a more specific and hand selected community, the majority that exists, despite the fact being super small.
It sounds like,
but it's all about trust development, and that takes time.
It sounds like in this type of situation at Superfest, and in this kind of DAO structure, if you're a floater, you're going to float away essentially, and
I don't know, though.
You need to be active.
You know what? We've always said this from day one. You're going to get out as much of this as you put in. That's been the credo since day one, right? And I've had people that have like gone away for weeks and they've come back. And so like the thing about me is I'm very accessible, right? Like if you ping me in the Discord, I'm going to get to it that day. I'm going to give you a direct response. I'm going to be like, yo, hit me in DM. There's like over 150 people have my Calendly, so I can just set up a meeting. Like I'll have meetings where I'm like, who the hell? Oh yeah, it's just someone in the community. I haven't met them yet. Cool. My thing is, because we're creating new ways to like stay tapped in, like the founder portal is going to be a big deal for that, right? When you start to take your announcements and you make them notifications versus like a Discord announcement with every other server you're in, changes the way that you stay on top of things, right? The other thing too is like, we have multiple people that are as approachable as I am, where like you can set up that time to be like, yo, like I've been out of pocket for 4 weeks, but like I'm back. How do I get involved? And they can be like, oh, boom, 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 boom. Go talk to this person, that person, whatever. And then the last thing that's been a godsend, not enough Discord servers have this, is the forums feature. It's huge. I don't think a lot of servers are using this. The only one I know besides us is Artifact. But like forums allow certain conversations to stay relevant and not get lost in chat. So it's like going back to the message boards days or Reddit, right? So like that makes it way easier to tap back in. But I would say it's choose your own journey, but you're definitely, if you stay tapped in at a high clip, like people who have, which there's quite a bit of them, will tell you they've got a lot out of that. And I definitely think that like the experience only intensifies, but that's kind of like any project, right?
Is Superfest technically a DAO? Because earlier you said it has a DAO-like feature, so I assume that it might not be a DAO.
Well, we call it a do because we're not autonomous.
Yeah.
Like people know my government, and I don't care. I'm not worried about anything that comes with that. So it's funny because I said the same thing in a meeting, and one of our other founders, Mike Lazaro, who's really prominent figure in the space or whatever, he said that exact line, and I've just ran with it ever since. But yeah.
Nice.
So, yeah.
I'm curious too. It sounds like you guys are building your own. You're calling it the Founders Portal.
Yeah.
How do you personally feel about Discord and the insane use of it in Web3?
I was using Discord before Web3, so I love Discord forever. Like I think that I've been telling so many people like it's the dopest social platform that's ever been invented because it's community building at the core, and it's like all the things that you want to do can be done there in a really cool way, right?
Yep.
I think the security stuff sucks, but like at the same time, majority of that's social engineering. So it's like if you know how to avoid the fact that like I don't really actually know this person, so like why would I click on a link? Like, you know, you could be fine. I just think that like, however, the learning curve for it is higher than any social platform. Like it just doesn't look and feel like other ones. So like when you have
Yeah.
someone who, you know, you're homies with that is huge on Instagram or YouTube, whatever, they come over, they're like, what the fuck do I do? And, you know, and some of them just don't make it through the learning curve. Like I've had a lot of friends that like during the pandemic, like we were watching, you know, everything from like, you know, I'm a big Knicks fan or whatever, you know, which is unfortunate. I'm a big Tennessee Vols fan, and we're having a great year. So I'm gonna call that out live on stream. If we beat Georgia this weekend, you will hear some more from me in a lot of different ways. But we were watching sporting events that everybody's into, and like they just literally could not wrap their heads around the environment, right? So, you know, it's one of these things that I just know is not going to be mass consumption the way that like TikTok is or Instagram. So then, therefore, it's like we have to meet people where they are. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the number one thing that I've always preached in like doing creative marketing is like, hey, like your idea is great. No one cares about your problems. So like you have to go to their turf. You always do. Right. Like if you want to be a part of something, you want to interest people, like you got to meet them where they are. So we know that people engage with apps. We know that like if that app has enough baked in utility as to why you might use it, and we can get into your top 5, we're going to make people like back to what Thomas was saying. We're going to make people power users, but just by way of having a way better method of engagement. You know what I mean? Like if we could break into your top 5, top 8 used apps, like you're probably going to naturally be more connected to our project than a lot of other things that you just do in life because it's right there, you know? And so we're building out a function where like over time, we're going to introduce features that are going to like basically include everything from chat to announcements feed to a directory for community members. So again, like this is one of the things that's unique about us, right? It's like in a lot of Web3 projects, people want to be anonymous. In our project, people don't really give a shit because people want to like build human connection, and we are all expecting to meet each other. So if we're all expecting to meet each other, the anonymity really doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because it's like, why be anonymous and weird now when I'm just going to meet you in 6 months and I know that that's coming? You know what I mean?
Just going to dox myself in 6 months.
Right. Like I dox myself day one. And so like the thing that's cool for us though is we can build things like a directory, which is important when you think about a treasury because it's like, oh, my name is Corey Nocco and I am in creative marketing and I'm good at these 10 things and I really want to learn more about these things. And here's my resume and like stuff, cool creative projects I've been a part of. Anybody who needs a creative marketer, brand strategist, big idea guy that has a ton of relationships on the production side can find me and recruit me to be part of their proposal, right? And do it in an easy way. So, and the other thing why that's important, and this goes into like another thing that we're building out that I'll get into in a second, is cultures are based on factions and tribes of like-minded interest people that are like in smaller pockets, laddering up to one bigger mission, right? Like this way that we've done culture in the social media age was like, it's freaking, you know, mass armies of ants that are all have the same groupthink mentality, wearing the same shit. Like, there's never been a lasting culture that's done stuff that way. So, like, we kind of have to acknowledge that we got to break people into smaller groups to like increase that human connection and consequence and purpose within what we're building, so that they can then mobilize and work together in the common goal of what we're building at large, right? So that's done through proposals. But the other thing that we're going to introduce and officially roll out in 2 weeks on the 17th, when we have the founder forum, is this concept that we're calling squads, which is going to be the ability for people to build subcommittees that have everyday consequence and value that they're driving against for the project, and also be compensated for their efforts. Cool. Because the insight that we got is we opened a job portal with 5 jobs and we got 655 applications. It's like one less than the amount of unique holders that we have.
Yeah.
And it was like, and not all of them were holders, but it was like, oh shit, like even people who maybe like, because we had a high mint price, I'm not gonna lie, it was like a $500 entry, right? For in a bear market, like that's pretty damn high. Yeah. But the amount of value is like, if you've tapped in, you've gotten thousands of dollars worth of value, free tickets, and like all this kind of like, you know, all this different stuff that you've been, you know, access. And we're still in the infancy of this thing. Our thing is like, how do we get everybody to be able to work with us? Well, you can now submit a proposal. You can form a squad with smaller groups of people. You can outline what you're going to do and value you're going to provide to the community. And you have very clear KPIs. We're going to post X amount of times per week. we're going to drive social conversation up, which we're going to bring all that data back into the founders portal, make it readily accessible. We're big on scoreboarding in the sense that everyone has visibility to what the goals are. So then we can work towards common goals, right? But what's going to be cool is like, I'll also talking about we don't have a PFP. Like this is the first layer of identity. It's like, hey, I'm part of the meme poster Friday shit posting squad.
Yep.
Like, great. What's your brand? What's your name? How do you look? How do you engage? Like, how do you represent yourself? You guys have a dinner coming up at Basel. You guys have, this meetup happening at Brooklyn Mirage. Like, whatever it is, people start to get like identity in a way that where you're defined by what they do, not by what they have. And so it's going to be a really cool paradigm in like the progression of the project. And I think it's going to get people the ability to learn and work with other people of like-minded and different interests, because you can be a member of multiple squads if you have the time, But what I like about it is if you can't keep up with everything that's going on and you're part of a squad, you have like, okay, I know I'm going to do this one thing. I'm going to tap into this one way, right? So it gives just different ways of people engaging and getting value out of the project.
Yeah, I'm curious, why couldn't you build Superfest pre-Web3? What is it about Web3 that unlocks the ability to Superfest to exist?
That's a good question. I think it's really that like stuff being on chain creates a mentality shift in a way. I think it creates like these smaller concentric circles of unity around something where there's transparency and shared consequence and a greater mission. I think it's probably been used to take advantage of people. It creates maybe a sense of trust that people have like kind of, like used in not so great a ways sometimes. But I also would say too, like, I don't know that the concept of like the mechanics of like how our treasury works, like really are powered by the blockchain. You know what I mean? Like you could do it with Venmo, but it's like, you wouldn't have the same transparency to like what goes in and what goes out. You know what I mean? So there's just a trust factor. And I think also too, it's like as complicated as the blockchain is, like it ain't that crazy. The one thing that I would say also going back to cultural development, which you guys can tell I spent a lot of time like, in this field, is like cultures are typically developed where there is a high barrier to entry to start, right? Like hip hop started because people were playing in parks and they had a story to tell that, a lot of people didn't want to listen to in mass, but they could find their tribe and play for them and get, break the door down and start to like move upwards. Like sneaker culture started where people like Ben Baller, the goats of the space, were driving down, all through California, going skate shop after skate shop, picking up these rare things that were sitting on shelves that he knew had some type of collector value, right? Like that's work. And so to me, like people were like, oh, we got to reduce the friction. I'm like, yeah, but I kind of like the friction because the people that cross the barrier are so qualified to be part of something in a different way. Like if we make everything Instagram, it's like, okay, cool. I'm here for 3 days and I'm out, And so I'm not saying that it needs to stay this way forever, but I think there's a positive side to this that gets very quickly overlooked. We're so used to like 10 million, 5 billion. It's like, like you could do a lot of shit with like 10,000 people, like a lot of shit, And so, I don't know. I don't have the answer for all the reasons why this couldn't happen in Web 2. I know that they toyed at Superfly with the idea of doing something Kickstarter related. What the other thing, I think that the token keeps greater connectivity long term. I think that the appreciation and value is a thing, right? Like if everybody puts effort into this thing, you have a tangible asset that can rise in value based on the way that like there's a increased demand over supply. There's a lot of dynamics to it. And for that reason, like I'm fully on board of like, Web3 is the future. I don't know if we'll ever see the acronym NFT after the next 18 months. Like probably that needs to die. I don't know whose idea was like, where the fuck did Fungible come from? Who didn't bring any marketing guy in to be like, hey, like, probably not the word,
Web3 is like the greatest marketing word to ever happen. I love it.
Yeah, no doubt. Because when you say it to people, they're like, wait a minute, I'm in Web 2. That feels backwards.
Yeah, they're like,
I'm not old.
part of it. I'm not part of it.
Newest version.
Yeah.
It sounds like, Corey, what you were saying is that there's not one. It'd be hard to put one single reason as to like why this can't be done in Web 2. But Web 3 brings all these really small like benefits to it. The increase in friction, the novelty, the potential for appreciation, the transparency, the like connectivity of everybody. And it also, I like, previous to that question, I like what and you kind of mentioned it here too, of like, before we were talking about millions of users and billions versus just like 1,000. It sounds like it's okay to build small communities in Web3.
We have to build small communities in society. We have to. Mm-hmm. Like, when we have 5 lightning rods that matter, we have a big fucking problem on our hands. You know what I mean? Like, this isn't how like societies developed, culture developed. It wasn't about like, oh, these 20 people with a verified, check next to their name can basically sway an entire country's vote if they wanted to. Now, again, I'm going a little hyperbolic with that statement, but like, not really at the same time. Like, I talk about this because I grew up in hip hop in Brooklyn, right? I remember when I used to go like on trips with my family or like whatever it was. I used to play basketball on AAU. I'd go all around the country, right? You go to New Orleans and everybody dressed a certain way. You go to California and people dressed a certain way. Like, I could look at your shoes, your shirt. I knew that you were not from where I was from. You go to a music festival that's like a hip hop, like you go to Rolling Loud, everyone has the same archetype. There's like one archetype of I fit in. That's not expressive. Like, that's not unique. And why is that, right? It's because of what Instagram tells us. There's one algorithm and there's one look for everybody that's of this certain mindset. We have like 5 archetypes in the world right now. I believe that there's hundreds of thousands. And so, go to music. Go to music. Like, you know how happy, or any art form, you know how happy creators would be if they could make a livable wage by servicing 1,000 diehard fans versus having to sell 1 million or get 1 million streams that net them an average of maybe a livable wage.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
This is
like, and so like, that's why it goes back to my whole thesis of I love my 656 community members, because you know what? I can fucking talk to all of them. I know their first names. I know the shit that they want to see. I know that if we have an issue, we can get in a group chat or whatever, and we can hash it out and we can build to the future, because that struggle is what's going to make us last for another 3 years. Literally, like the ability for me to go and tell someone, this is my perspective, here's what their perspective was, we meet on different sides of the tracks and we come to a resolution. Like, that shit means that, like, it doesn't matter what our floor price means anymore. We're invested at some deeper level, And so, like, I do think for all the little things that you said, it just creates like an engagement mindset that's just different. And like right now, it's way different because it's like everybody's got reason to not be here. And that's a beautiful thing with like why I'm like, everyone's like, well, why are you still doing this and like dedicating so much time and flying this place for a day and come whatever and stress and blah. And I'm like, well, I would just rather be part of writing the story than watching the documentary in 5 years. I don't know.
It's almost a relief to people that want to get involved in Web3 or build businesses or whatever it is in Web3, that you don't need to become a Zuckerberg or an Elon Musk or anything. You just need to get to this point where you can just have this, just be at peace of a happy group of people.
No doubt. And you know what the funny thing is too? And they don't talk about this stuff, but like you go and you look at like an artist like Russ, who's an independent artist till he dies, gets left off of every streaming chart because the labels don't want people to know how well he does on his own. Go look at his money and then go look at like Playboy Cardi's money. It's fucking disgusting. But there is a thing to like independent, and this goes back to the idea of ownership when you think about it the right way, right? Like when a couple people can come together and own this thing together, whether it be through a digital asset or some type of form of investment or whatever, like you can create a lot of opportunity and wealth diversification for a good amount of people by servicing just a decent amount of people. Like we're talking about the first Superfest being for 5,000 attendees. Why? Because everything else is for 50,000. It'd be really cool to just do something for 5. Why? Because I'd rather go deeper with 5 than go surface level with 50. I asked this, we have a show that's actually on tomorrow called Keys Open Doors. It's like where we talk to our artist talent about like their time in the space and like what they got going on, blah, blah, blah. And I ask every single artist that we have on the show, would you rather play a room for 1,000 people or 100? Every one of them, 100 people, sweat dripping off the ceiling, locked the fuck in. It's like, okay, well, what does that tell you? You know? And so there's just like this really interesting paradigm that's happening where it's like, I think the mass virality of things is becoming less interesting. There'll be people that still pioneer that and do that, but there's gonna be a lot more. Maybe this is how we build back the middle class, right? By like building these like subgroups and sub communities that can just be happy coexisting and being good enough and servicing what their needs are and feeling fulfilled. Because like I know a lot of people that don't need to make $100 million to feel happy. I know some people that want to.
That reminds me, even from a fan perspective, like Thomas and I used to host and go to a lot of So Far Sounds shows when we were living in Chicago and San Francisco. And we always prefer the shows that are, in a living room. You're sitting on the floor. There's 40 of you there. It's so much better than going to they pretty much just do WeWorks now. So Far Sounds, which is annoying. And you go to like a WeWork show and there's like 150 people there, and you're like, this isn't as good as it used to be.
I'm a diehard Fish fan too, which is odd. That's like Jay-Z and Fish are my two biggest. They actually did play together in Brooklyn one time, which is funny. But like every tour I seek out, like aside from Madison Square Garden, which is like to me the greatest music venue ever, I seek out like the biggest shithole on tour. Like where are they going to perform? Where like there's going to be the longest bathroom lines. There's going to be the lowest attendance. It might smell terrible. There might have not been a good show here in a decade, because like it's like the ability to find magic in unassuming places, versus like it's a cool venue, the Chase Center out in San Francisco, but like I don't know, I loved Oracle.
For sure. Do you have a few more minutes? I just realized we're like way over.
Yeah, no, I'm good, man.
Okay, cool.
Once we get rolling, I'm locked in.
Yeah. I want to ask you. So you're deep into running a community in Web3. So I'm assuming you've learned a lot and you've seen what works and what doesn't. What like if someone listening is thinking and they have an idea for a community they want to start, what are kind of some learnings you have and some key takeaways that you might do differently next time?
That's an interesting question. So the number one takeaway that I would have going into it next time is, well, actually, you know what? The number one recommendation I would have is get good and comfortable with not being derivative. Like
what do you mean by that?
Because almost every project has a derivative mechanic to it. It's like, oh, like this person did staking, we're going to do staking. This person did PFP, we got to go and do a PFP. This thing looks like this, we got to look like that. Like I told this to a lot of people, but I was like, what got me fucked up was like, I'm a competitor, right? So like you want to do things to the best of your ability, but it's like you're forced to realize at some level that like if you're being innovative, not everybody can understand that right out of the gate. And you have to go the path less traveled. Now, if you're in it for the money, which is like you guys can tell over this conversation, right? Like that's not the core thing that drives me, right? There's a lot of other things. Like, I like money and I like, living a certain type of lifestyle. But at the same time, like it's always got to be about something more. I think following your intuition, but also and doing what you passionately want to pursue as like the creme de la creme expression of what you're trying to say and what you're trying to build. You should do that. And you should not change things based on the fact that something else that was this way sold at this rate, right? However, you should also understand what it means to truly be an entrepreneur. Because what it really means to be an entrepreneur is to be really good at eating shit. Like the best entrepreneurs just eat shit the longest. You know what I'm saying? Like, because nobody ever remembers the 17 years before you made your, whatever you made, or that one big thing. Like, go back to the director of Squid Game, like pitched Squid Game for like 20 years, and then all of a sudden it's like the fucking darling in Netflix, right? Like, great creatives and entrepreneurs got to eat shit until it's your time, And I think in this space, what we've done is create a culture of hyperbolic wealth creation based on wild fantasy. And so people come in and like, wait a minute, I've never been shit in my life. I'm going to go and start a Web3 project. I'm going to make millions and I'm going to we'll figure it out after that. And it's like, yeah, I don't know. So it's like, I think it's hard to go against the grain and like not do a PFP project or to even do a DAO. Like DAOs don't move at like lightning pace. But here's the other thing I would challenge. All of these hyperbolic mints that you've seen, what happens the next month, 6 months for them? Majority of them face number one question. is this a rug? You know, like people forget that VFriends didn't sell out. People forget that like Squiggle took a while. People forget that like if it wasn't for Pranksy and Jimmy, like Bored Ape might have taken a lot longer than it did, and it still took time. Like good things have to go through their natural course of progression. And I tell people that we've done our best job to make this as hard of a fucking project as we possibly can to get the right people in. But once people get in, like you'll see, there's like at any point in time we have like less than 10 listings on OpenSea for the most part because people want to be here, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like follow your fucking gut, but get ready to eat shit. It ain't easy. For real.
At the beginning, and I wanted to ask this earlier and I forgot, you mentioned that you really like Nouns DAO and that's one of your favorite projects. Can you kind of explain that? I don't know much about it. So if you can kind of explain what it is and what you like about it so much.
Well, I just think that Nouns pioneered the idea of decentralized creativity and like venture capital for it. I think that they have amassed a wild treasury. Like last I checked, it's like $54 million. And they were like kind of like, you know, they were massive inspiration for us because I was just like, hey, like you guys could tell from like my start in, you know, building my own creative agencies, like I don't believe that great creative ideas come from one place, right? Like I think that that's actually a pretty democratized exercise. And I think that they did a really good job of introducing the concept of on-chain creativity and you know, venture capital investment for the best ideas where the best ideas win. I think, you know, the struggle with the DAO like that capacity is like how do you continue to make it make sense for outsiders as you grow, because it can get very convoluted and it can get very insular. And I think that that comes down to, you know, the way that you think about your messaging hierarchy and your brand hierarchy. And it's like, you know, you don't have to tell everybody the full fucking spiel, right? Like if I was to do, like, if we were like to redo the whole interview, right, when you were asking like, what is Superfest, and I didn't actually tell my answer to the prior question, I would have just been like, it's a venture capital firm for creative with a really good party, right? Like boil it all the way down. Like that's the lead in. And I think that like, you know, that's the hardest part that like DAOs have to achieve. But like, I think they pioneered a lot of, you know, what this decentralized commoner venture capital building comes from. And I think what we're trying to do is to take what they pioneered and then like kind of like restructure it in a way that works best for a certain culture and dynamic of people that are really engaged in like the live music and art experience, you know, because theirs is very much like they don't have a filter in terms of the interest. Like ours is very much like if you don't like live music and art, like you probably not like, you know, like we're not a sports project. You know what I mean? A lot of people like sports, but we're just not, you know, it's not what we do. Theirs is much more open-ended. So I think we're putting a filter that kind of helps us to gear it towards certain people. When we activate, we have way more of a point of view. You know what I mean? And I like that for us because a lot of times when you try to mean everything to everybody, you mean nothing to nobody. You know what I mean? So that helps us.
Cool. Thomas, do you have any last minute questions?
Although I will want us to have you back on, Corey, for sure. Because this is so much fun.
Yeah, no, this was a good time, and I'm glad that I got out of this with saving like a bunch of hot takes for another one. But I still think I gave you some, so that's good.
Yeah, we'll clip them up for sure.
Thank you guys for having me.